how Trump's radical tariff plan could wreck the U.S. economy. Donald Trump has flip-flopped on many issues. Today he says he's pro-life. In 1999 he said, I'm very pro-choice. Last year he said Republicans should never give up on trying to repeal Obamacare. During September's presidential debate he said, I saved it. 3 years ago he said Bitcoin seemed like a scam. Now he wants to make America the crypto capital of the planet. But Trump's desire for high tariffs has been consistent. In an interview on Tuesday at the Economic Club of Chicago, he said, to me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. As president, he called himself a tariff man. In fact, he imposed substantial tariffs when in office, and those actions were, however, mild compared to the tariffs he's proposing now. He initially suggested a 10% tariff on all imports, but now he talks about tariffs as high as 20%. In Chicago, he even mused about 50%. He wants a 60% tariff on imports from China. And more economists believe that this would be a terrible idea. And the writer says, and I share that view, I'm not a free trade purist. I oppose the Obama administration's proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership and have been generally supportive of the much tougher line the Biden-Harris administration has taken on trade. But there's a big difference between sophisticated, limited deviations from free trade and Trump's desire to put what he called a ring around the collar of our economy. It has never been entirely clear why Trump has a thing for tariffs. My guess is that he sees everything in terms of winners, losers, and punishment. If we buy more from foreigners than they buy from us, that in his mind makes America a loser, and he wants to punish foreigners for making them pay for access to U.S. market. Whatever he's thinking, restoring the good old days of high tariffs is one of Trump's key policy obsessions, and high tariffs may very likely be, or will likely become a reality if he wins the election. And when I say that the good old days, I mean good old. High tariffs were a consistent feature of American policy from the Civil War through 1933. But in 1934, we turned into a policy of reducing tariffs on other countries' exports in return for lower tariffs on our exports. This policy was spectacularly successful at overcoming opposition to tariff cuts. But by the beginning of the 21st century, average U.S. tariff rates were down to the low single digits, with comparably low tariffs in other wealthy nations. Developing countries generally had much higher tariffs until the 1980s, but these became unfashionable with the rise of the so-called Washington Consensus, and many began slashing rates. By the time Trump took office in 2017, we were living in a world of relatively free trade. Trump's initial round of tariffs made only a small dent in the system, but the tariffs he's proposing now would turn the clock back 90 years, raising overall tariffs to Smoot-Hawley levels. And a picture of that emphasized show how radical his policies would be. Why do this? Trump sees tariffs as a way to reduce U.S. trade deficits and boost domestic manufacturing. Again, economists widely believe his tariffs would not achieve these goals. But before we get into the pros and cons, let's start with some basics about tariffs and what they do. A tariff is a tax paid on foreign goods when they cross our border. In a direct sense, a tax is usually paid by the shipping company, but neither supporters nor opponents of tariffs believe that the shippers actually bear the burden of the tax, just as nobody believes that your local grocer, who must collect sales tax, pays the tax out of his own or her own pocket. In fact, the easiest way to think about a tariff is that it's a selective sales tax imposed only on goods produced abroad. As with any sales tax, the burden of the tariff falls either on consumers who pay higher prices or on producers who receive lower prices. Economists and I believe that most people would agree that sales tax are usually passed on to consumers. Take, for example, the high tax rate, $5.35 per pack, New York imposes on cigarette sales, Since New York is not a tobacco growing state, that is in effect a tax on products imported into New York from other parts of the U.S. Does anyone imagine that? Say North Carolina tobacco producers effectively pay this tax by cutting their prices? Of course not. New York pays simply, the New York tax simply makes cigarettes here much more expensive than they are in North Carolina, where the tax is just 45 cents per pack. So why then imagine that the story is different when the sales tax is imposed on goods produced in China? For that is what a tariff on imports from China amounts to. There's nothing magical about collecting the sales tax at the border rather than at the cash register. That's a very long article concerning the history of tariffs, but we don't have to go into that. The writer says Trump tariffs would rip up the agreements that keep worldwide tariffs relatively low, inspired both retaliation and emulation that would fragment world markets. And this would hurt even big, rich economies like those of the United States and the European Union, but it could prove catastrophic for smaller, poorer economies. The Trump tariffs could cause a spike in global poverty, and it's easy to imagine global conflict as well. So what's the bottom line on the pros and cons of Trump's tariff proposals? The cons: the tariffs would impose large burdens on middle and lower income families. They probably would not significantly reduce the trade deficit and might actually hurt American manufacturing. And unilateral U.S. tariff action would wreak havoc by fracturing the world trading system. Pros: I can't think of any, says the writer. And this is by New York Times on DNYUZ. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.